Yeah, hello everybody. In this Hangout and in this live stream, we would like to try to distribute some of the roles which Chris was taking. And as you probably have read already, Chris is fighting with serious health issues, and we're trying to take away a workload from him and distributing some of those roles to other contributors. So we would like to discuss with the people who are in the Hangout who can take some roles. If you could not make it to the Hangout, feel free to join later. We have this Google Doc, which is linked in the notes below the live stream. And when you can imagine you could take this role, please make a note there. There are descriptions in every role, and Chris has made the report, so you can get a pretty good overview already what's about to take over the responsibility for such a role. And Chris will go into more details about every role and what's the main task of those roles. Maybe I hand over to Chris if you want to make a secondary introduction.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'll just give an update. I guess everybody's on the call anyways aware that I got this leukemia diagnosis. So I'm here in Vienna's lovely general hospital. I actually have a pretty kick-ass view of the city, which is a nice perk. And I have this very fashionable thing hanging out of my neck, which is where chemo medicine goes in, and sometimes blood comes out for tests. And I'm 1 week in to what will be a months-long treatment protocol, but the protocol is roughly cut up into 1 month intervals or cycles. So I'm in the first cycle, or the induction cycle, which is a 7-day, so I'm actually on day 6, I think, of actually a 24-hour-a-day infusion of different chemotherapy drugs. I happen to be disconnected right now just for this call and to take a shower earlier, right? But otherwise, it's all day, every day, and the major side effect that has is that I feel nauseous, semi-nauseous by default, just about all the time, which ends up being really debilitating, like having no appetite, not being able to eat, and basically not wanting to do anything. So some things help, right? And I think it's also kind of plateauing out, but that's how week 1 has been. And week 2 and week 3, the next couple of weeks, I'll continue to be in the hospital because the chemo drugs kind of wipe out the immune system almost completely. So I'm under observation here for the big threat, which is infection. The leukemia doesn't kill you; it's infection that kills you. So just on a watchful eye, and I'll stay here for a couple of weeks, and then hopefully go home. And then it's kind of rinse and repeat a couple of times. And if all goes smoothly, then about 3 months from now, sometime around the end of August, I think, I'd get a bone marrow transplant, or a stem cell transplant is maybe a better name, where I actually completely, this is an amazing, like, miracle of modern medicine, this is all possible, right? Completely replace my blood production system, including my entire immune system. So I'll have a different blood type. I'll have somebody else's immune system. I probably won't have my allergies anymore, right? So there's that's it. Yeah, everything goes smoothly. Probably August, September might be on the other side of it. Could go other ways. Could be months longer than that. We just have to see. But there's plenty of reason to be positive. And other than the nausea and so on, I basically feel good. And when I do feel good, usually the thing that I want to do is something work-related. And so I have been doing that. People see me around a little bit. I'll be around as much as I can, but it is the simple fact that I can't do the level of work that I was doing before. It's just simply hasn't been happening. Maybe that'll change, but so excellent that Mantle puts this together. Thanks everybody for coming. These roles that I've been taking care of for the last 8 months or whatever it's been, sort of officially, they need to be handed off anyway. There's plenty of perfectly capable people to do it. Many of them are established, clear what to do. Many of them are actually, there's very little to do. So yeah, we can go through them all, but I think for an update, that's about all I have off the top of my head to share. I'd be happy to answer any questions just before we move on, if anybody has any.
Yeah, from my side, no big questions. We talked up front already, so I'm happy to take over the compensation requests starting from this month. And I think you also had this secondary DNS admin role as well. So,
yeah, exactly. And thank you.
Yeah, I might need some guidance in the beginning, but yeah, it should be fine, hopefully.
Yeah, generally with all of these, and maybe I'll share my screen, and Manfred can share a screen or something with the roles. We can go down through each one, but generally I would be around. I mean, I am around to answer questions and so on. And for me, I actually see the whole thing as, ironically, a kind of nice opportunity to hand these off, not just for the purpose of distributing them, but also just as a kind of forcing function to write some stuff down, to document some things. It's the main thing I'm focused on. Anyway, as I think I've mentioned before in the most recent updates that I've done and so on, I just think the place where I can have the most leverage, and also the thing that I want to do the most, simply that I enjoy doing the most, is writing everything down. That we've already figured out how to operate certain things, how we think we want stuff to go, decisions that we've already made. And that's all the documentation, right, at the new doc site. And then there's more aspirationally, we'll see if I get to doing any of this, but writing pieces on Medium or whatever. I think we actually like have something to say about what we mean when we say DAO. I think we're earning the sort of option to share a perspective, right, on what it can mean to be or to try to operate a DAO and all of that. So I think we have something valuable to add there, and I'd love to write about that. It could be, of course, good for many reasons, but that's what I'd like to focus on mostly. And so it just works out perfectly that if people are taking on my roles, what I can also be handing off is basically the documentation of that role, helping to start it, helping to write it, helping to review it. And I've got a rather that documentation. You may have seen some of it coming in, just like proposals are now, I think, pretty well documented. You can really go from nothing to writing a proper proposal just by reading the proposals documents. And I think the quality of the proposals that we're seeing come in has something to do with that. So I'd like to have that quality of documentation for just everything we do, at least as an aspiration. So I can hand that off, I can help do that work, I can review that work. Just a nice way to hand off the baton. So shall we go through the doc? Anybody have anything else to say before we do that?
Maybe just note, Mike told me before he cannot join the call now, but he offered to take over the price node operator if we don't find somebody else. I mean, he's already running a few different nodes and taking a few roles already, so it would be good when we find other developers who don't already own so many nodes roles, but he would be available. Yeah, I started a screen sharing. Or do you prefer to make it on your side, Chris? I don't mind. I think you're muted, Chris.
Okay. Can you actually see my screen now?
I think it's my screen, but maybe I think I have to probably stop it. I try to stop it again.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe you make screen sharing now.
Might be better if I share mine. Yeah. Go ahead.
Should I share my screen again?
No, I'm going to share mine now.
Yeah.
Okay, how's this?
Looks good.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, let's just go down through them real quick. I guess, especially if people are in here, you can just write your name next to it. I would say at this point, like, if you want to just claim something, awesome, that's fine. But also, just if you're interested, if you want to just have a conversation about it, this doesn't have to be super committal at the moment. So events maintainer, this is one of these like pretty low activity things. It's basically about keeping up calendar, keeping track of what sort of major media events we do, like podcasts we've done and stuff like that. I'm not sure how much value this has had so far, but I think the more we're doing, the more value it may have, especially if we have anything like a lot of events going on. So it's been something that's kind of been anticipatory infrastructure right now. And mostly I just use it to track my own work. Like if I write an article or do a podcast, I just make sure that there's a GitHub issue for it. It takes maybe, I don't know, an hour a week of work, of work every month, just sort of at the end of the month when I'm doing my compensation request. So it would be good if somebody were like more proactive about it. And this is true of a number of these things. So I'll just elaborate on it from the events perspective. What would be, I'll say what hasn't worked. I think like what's been a challenge about these roles so far is that there's just too many of them, right? So basically when I wake up in the morning, I'm not thinking about events, right? I'm thinking about 5 other things. And basically everything gets neglected until I just sort of keep up some basic level of maintenance on it. And what would be really cool, our vision for this has always been, is that there's enough people involved with enough roles, and any one person doesn't have very many roles that they're taking care of. So it's possible to spend real quality time and just make sure that everything's shipshape, looking good, taken care of in every domain, right? So for me, it's always been like kind of a lot of end of the month busy work and things like that. But that's not the goal. The goal is that it's basically easy to take care of these and to do a good job doing it, like really provide valuable services. Like Bisq's calendar is always up to date. There's always a record of whatever events that we did, so that people can really go back and catch up on old talks and interviews and all that kind of stuff, right? And also to shape what that role means. The current iteration of all these roles is just what they are at the moment. The only question that matters is what's useful, right? So nothing needs to stay the way it is just because it is that way now. These are all just best efforts. So it's also like taking real authorship with it. It's not just filling in. There's also the option of like really making it what it ought to be in your mind and according to what other people say is valuable. So there's that. Ambassador is or maybe I'll just pause after each one of these. Is this for anybody something that you think you'd like to do? No, it's okay. And I don't know, maybe I won't pause. Maybe just afterward we can all just go put our names on, like after the call, just for time, if nothing else. Okay, so the ambassador role is a little bit of a strange role because it's not exactly something that you take on. Like I'm a Bisq ambassador. It's always a little bit of a funny word. I couldn't find really a better word. But the reason that I casted this as a role is that I really did want, like, for at least potentially all the people that are out there, just being helpful, being useful, adding value, from Reddit to the forums to Twitter to wherever they hang out, wherever their tribe is or whatever, wherever they get their news, that kind of thing. If they're simply adding value, not shilling, not pumping, not being weird. None of this has anything to do with being weird, right? But like actually helping. That there's a place like that role to give a monthly update. Like, hey, I really kind of manned the battle stations at our Bisq this month, or our Bitcoin, kind of looking out for people who might be interested in Bisq, but nobody's brought it up yet, so I always bring it up. Whatever that is, to me, that's playing the role in that moment of being an ambassador for Bisq, being a good spokesperson for what this is and for what we're doing, and institutionalizing that as a role is just for that purpose, so that people can fully legit, submit a compensation request, reference the role, monthly report where they say what they did. And an early proto example of that is what Alexi does with the forum every month, right? Alexi doesn't share like 75 links in his compensation requests for every conversation you have. But as stakeholders, we're all comfortable with that he provides a level of service and adds, value to people showing up to the forum. There's just a level of trust that we're all happy to vote affirmative on his compensation requests, right? And that would be the steady state that you want ambassadorship to get to, is like repeat players who we just know do a good job, and it's easy to vote yes for, right? Something would really have to go wrong for that to change. When people are just starting out, nobody knows them. Of course, they provide. There's just a higher burden of proof. They should provide links. They should say, "Hey, here's who I am. Here's what I've been doing, and I'd like to be compensated for it." Until that level of trust is established, right? So that's that ambassador can just mean and be a lot of things, but this is about providing a channel for people to request compensation and report the value that they've added. That's what that role is about, and that's what that channel is about in Slack, right? Just a place for people to coordinate, collaborate, share links. I guess the picture that I've always had in my head is that there's just enough people there, 5, 10, 15, 20 people that, are just kind of keeping up on buzz and responding appropriately. I don't know what it could become. And I guess the last thing to say about that is I guess, to some degree, probably all of us play that role, and to the degree that you ever talk to anybody, online or whatever about Bisq, and it's just a hat that you wear, being an ambassador. So if you spent extra time or something like that on Reddit this month talking to people about Bisq, never hesitate to say that. Never hesitate to request compensation for that even. Proposals maintainer. This is a good example of a role where it's not like completely on rails, but it's been well documented. We have lots of examples of these proposals. We have a structure, a process there that I think is working just by virtue of the fact that people are using it, and it's going pretty smoothly. And I think it's like producing valuable stuff. Many proposals lately are like really interesting. That we do. Like, I really look forward to reading those proposals. So what the maintainer there is about is same as maintainer in every case, right? What are you maintaining? You're maintaining that repository, which of course is inclusive of code and issues. And in the case of proposals, there's no code except the issue template, right? So there's just the issues in there, and it's about following the process that's documented. in every case, this is something that I want to write down really explicitly, and I haven't done yet. It's in C4. What I'm about to say, but it like really deserves underlining and highlighting for us right now. I think as we continue to grow, is that this idea of maintainer. It's really not a very privileged status. Seems like it is because you've got commit rights and admin rights on a repo, but really what you're there to do is simply to make sure things go to process. That reviews have happened on a pull request. That rough consensus has in fact been achieved. That any dissenting opinions about a patch have been discussed satisfactorily, right? So you are making judgments, and you do need to know your stuff in that repository. You need to know what you're maintaining better than most other people, but not better than everybody, right? That's the whole point. Is that no one person or a couple of people is really going to be better than a big group working together and reviewing each other's stuff. So the maintainer role so far has, unsurprisingly, it's been a lot more than that. That's mostly been Manfred and Christoph and me playing the maintainer role, and a lot of what that looks like just on a daily basis is both reviewing and merging. Right, so it feels like maintainer means person who reviews everything, right? And that's actually not what it should mean. Mostly because it doesn't scale, and mostly because it puts too much power in that one person's So, like, I'm speaking more generally than proposals right now, but a number of these things are maintainers. So that's why I'm just digressing on this for a moment. I think we really want to intentionally separate out the role of maintainer from the role of reviewer in everything we do, in every repository we work on, and start getting used to pull requests taking a day or two or more, right, to get reviews. Start relaxing into the idea that things of real substance, like work that matters, should get a few days to breathe, right? And should get some time for people who may care, may know, or may have improvements to review that, and that that's okay, and that that's a good thing, right? Now, again, practically speaking, we're still small. There's still lots of stuff that you just need to do the pull request and merge it, basically, right? And that's fine too. But like keeping the distinction and definition maintainer really crisp is important now, even though we're so small, because it can allow us to distribute this role. The role that I'm maintaining a whole slew of these repositories, but I'm happy to hand off that maintainership when it's properly understood as the person who makes sure that the process is being adhered to, and the person who, when they judge it's the right time to do so, clicks the merge button. When you see maintainership that way, you can take a big, deep breath, because it's not like, oh God, I'm responsible for absolutely everything, and every decision has to be mine, and I have to be smarter about all of this stuff than everybody else. That's not it at all. If you're not comfortable merging a PR because you don't think it's been sufficiently reviewed, and you can't sufficiently review it, that's what you'd say, right? So you make sure the process gets followed. So that's quite a digression, but again, these are the things that I really want to make crisp here, because I think these ideas and these distinctions really do scale. So we want to not conflate them and confuse them. But with proposals, it's all written down. It's basically following this.
Chris, we lost your audio, at least on my
side.
side.
No, it's just mute.
Did you?
Oh, strange. I don't know how it got muted. But you got me now, right?
Now it's fine again, yeah. Maybe just the last 20 seconds or so.
Yeah. So with proposals, this is basically, I think it's an easy job in the sense that it doesn't take a whole lot of time, but it does take diligence, and it does take like, you see a proposal come in, should it, if not read every word of it, you should scan it, right, and look at it and say like, okay, is this basically a correct proposal? Has somebody taken the time to really articulate an idea clearly, or are they basically externalizing costs on all of us? Just saying like, hey, I think it would be really cool if Bisq had an X, right? That's an example of a bad proposal, right? Yeah. Because then everybody has to...
Anti-span, follow process.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So you're the first line of defense as the maintainer. You just say, incorrect, sorry, please go back and read the docs. Happy to have your proposal, try again, right? But if it looks all good, then you assign it to them. You, basically give it your first thumbs up if you're on board with it or whatever. But now it's just open for review, and you give it a couple of weeks, right? Now I've been fairly loose about this, but the idea is everybody should expect their proposals to have a couple week maturity period where people can really have the time to sit down with it. I don't know about all of you, but when I see those proposals come in, most of them I really want to read. And it's just a question of getting some quality time to do it. And if I know I've got a couple of weeks, I find that I do actually get in there and engage. And then after the couple of weeks, you look at it again and you say, okay, we have something like rough consensus. Is there any follow-up that needs to be done? And you have an eye toward closing that proposal after 2 weeks. You may or may not close it after 2 weeks, but that's your intention, is to like move the thing along. Do we have a consensus? Great. Somebody knows how to take action. Then it's just 100% on the person who put the proposal together to go execute it. It's nobody else's responsibility, right? But I think if we keep that kind of clean machine for structured ideation, or whatever you want to call it, that's a big asset for us. So I think it's actually I think that's a kind of juicy role, basically. It's one that I'm a little reluctant to give up. But yeah, so there you go. Okay, you guys just got to tell me if this is like too much or whatever, but I'm going to try to keep just going through these as I have. Is this working?
Hey, Chris, with maintainer, you hand it over completely. You could just have someone as sort of learning the ropes with you as a supervisor for a little while, and, slowly.
Yes, yeah. Thanks for saying that. That's in many cases that's what I like to do. I think some things actually can't just hand over. That's probably a good example of one to do in a transition period. Yeah, exactly. So there's also, it doesn't need to be this hard cut where I just hand you the keys and say good luck or something like that. Just the opposite. Okay. So roles maintainer is a similar story, right? Basically an issues only repository. So those who have been roles, my original plan was to document each role in the form of a role specification. So this with that, there are.
Chris, the audio quality is pretty bad just now. Before it was okay. Maybe you could repeat the last 20 seconds. I'm not sure if it was on the other side as well. It's better if it's on my side, but here it's probably on Chris' side.
It looks like it's okay, as far as I can tell. Can everybody else hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so the thing with roles is that if you look at that repository, there are some of these role specification documents, like like I first documented the Twitter role, right? Basically how to operate the Twitter handle. But like I said, I've abandoned that. I've written about that in some of my updates, etc. Rather, what I'm doing now is I'm not documenting the role, but I'm documenting if there's a process, I'm documenting the process. For example, proposals, right? So we have the proposals document, which is about the thing that matters, right? So like roles are an implementation detail of carrying out the thing in the world that matters, which is proposals, right? So proposals maintainer is just necessary to this end. So that's why I did away with these idea of role specifications and just started writing about the thing itself, which is proposals, put stuff in context from a high level to a low, and then you can get down into specific roles and responsibilities, like what does the roles maintainer do, right? And, trying to keep it real simple. So on one hand, what there is to do with the roles maintainer is you're basically just constantly evaluating, do the roles that we have make sense? Like, is anything beginning to just feel bureaucratic or paperwork? Or are people actually playing roles that matter and add value? And things change and projects come along. So, for example, if we have a Bisq remote, iOS app show up, and that ends up getting, put into the kind of DAO infrastructure and GitHub organization and so on, the roles maintainer would have a job there, right? They would make sure that a role issue gets created. Maybe somebody else creates it, maybe they create it, but they would just be looking after the integrity of things, right? So I'm sort of wearing my roles maintainer hat when I, of course, create role issues like Bisq desktop maintainer or all these different role issues that we have. But I'm also sort of playing that, wearing that hat when I'm creating GitHub teams so that we can address each other as those roles. You might have noticed that in my comments and issues and so on around GitHub, I very often don't mention, say, Alexi, but I'll mention forum operators, right? And that has a couple of effects. One is it actually mentions and notifies both Stefan MC, right, and Alexi, which increases the likelihood that whatever the issue is gets fixed. But it's also sort of, for me, the more important thing is the idea is to train us to think in roles. Don't think in terms of individuals, but like ideally there's a role for everything that needs to be done, and there's a communication route, structured communication route to get a message to the person who's responsible for that, or persons that are responsible for that role. It doesn't scale to have a bunch of individual names assigned to those roles. That's an unnecessary mapping that new people have to maintain. So if people have to learn that Alexi and Enzi are the operators of the Bisq forum, okay, then they know that. Now they're part of the inner circle. And now they can mention them or send them emails or whatever. But they had to learn that. And that scales poorly. If there's a generic formula and pattern and mechanism, a regularized system of getting notifications to people, you can just guess that you can mention Bisq network / forum operators, because that's just the structure of the kind of namespace that we address each other in, right? Then that can scale. You might not even know who's behind that, right? You can go look. But that's something that I'm doing when I'm playing the roles maintainer, or when I'm wearing that hat. So I'm thinking about what's everything that's necessary to make sure that role can do can do what it needs to do. It has an issue where it can do monthly report comments. It has a GitHub team where it can be addressed, as a team, not as individuals, and other things that I may be forgetting here right now. Giving them, making sure that team has admin access in any repositories that role is responsible for, et cetera, right? So not all of that stuff has been written down, but that's kind of the role. I don't know if it's going to work practically to hand that one off because for the reasons that I just described, it's kind of bound up with the GitHub admin role, which basically, frankly, I don't want to give up because there's just our most critical communication and collaboration backbone, and I feel like it's just constantly being tweaked to optimize. And so it would be a good idea to have an apprentice there, though, because what we have today is me and Manfred are owners of our GitHub organization. And owner means, God rights. Basically, you can do everything. You can blow the whole thing up. But Manfred plays a totally passive role there. So, Manfred, you're not in there kind of tweaking with permissions and team management and stuff like that. And that's all fine. It would be great if somebody wants to take on the roles maintainer, that they would also start shadowing me. They get access in GitHub so that they can start doing those things too. That would be another really good, it takes time transition kind of thing. Yeah, thanks for jotting that down. Just a moment, get some water. Okay, I'll move on. Jump into questions if you have any. The price node operator. This is actually one that I don't want keeping because it's sort of a point of pride to me that it requires absolutely zero interaction from me. So I'm very happy to run the price node that I principally rewrote. But it might be a good thing. It would certainly be a good thing if somebody can take it over if I'm like truly incapacitated, but we're nowhere near that yet. So I'm not sure. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, but it might make sense to hand off the maintainership of the price node repository. It would be a very good example. I think it might be the best example of an opportunity really to. So you'd be the maintainer. Of course, that means all the things we talked about before. You just make sure that reviews happen. You merge when things look, reasonable, et cetera. Do your own work, et cetera. The thing is, if you're a maintainer and you're actually doing substantive work on a repository, right? You're writing a new feature in Bisq Desktop, and you're making commits on a feature branch. You're just not the maintainer while you're doing that. You're not wearing that hat anymore. You're wearing the hat of contributor. So, if you played the role of price node maintainer, that would be great. And it doesn't mean that you wouldn't do your own work on the price node too. It just means that when you're doing your own work, you're a contributor and you submit pull requests and you wait for reviews on them. And then you put on your maintainer hat and you merge your own work at some point, right? This is sort of the weird world we live in while we're small. But just, again, I think keeping all of those distinctions really crisp is powerful. It'll help us scale immeasurably. So, but the point there is that if somebody wants to take on the price node maintainer role, that would be a very good example of something where that's all really fresh code. I know it really well. So anything that gets proposed to it, I'd certainly be able to review it in a way that is probably going to be reasonable and fully informed and all that stuff. And then you'd be just looking to merge it, right? And then that could turn into just greater and greater transition of responsibilities, and maybe at some point I'm not doing so many reviews there or whatever. But I think the other opportunity there is, and this is just a shameless plug for what I'd like to happen, I don't get to decide this in the end, but I'll say it, is that the structure of the code there and the way that that little node is built is something that I'd like other people to have exposure to and to have the opportunity to decide for themselves, would I like to build whatever the next node is in a similar way. Like, for example, with Joaquim's proposal number 25 with Bisq remote, right? That calls for a so-called Bisq notification node. It would be another peer-to-peer node just playing a specialized function of helping to relay these notifications ultimately to an Apple push notification server. But Manfred already made the point that it would be good if this were a node something like the price node, and very much what I had in mind when I was rewriting that price node was, how can we do this in a way that makes doing this again and again a very, very regularized kind of thing, a very straightforward structure and naming conventions and layering and all of that stuff, right? Because we can have a multiplicity of styles and all that stuff, but that hasn't really been what we've done so far. What we've done is we've really had a pretty homogeneous approach to how we build and deploy service style nodes and all of our software, right? It's all principally written by Manfred and all deployed in a very unified way, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing for us to be able to move with alacrity between different components and be able to intuit and understand and basically not have xenophobia every time we show up in somebody else's weird-ass world of code. I think a very good example of that is the markets website. We just don't have somebody on the team right now who wakes up in the morning and is like stoked to go make tweaks to the PHP over there or whatever it is. I don't even know. I've hardly spent any time ever looking at it, right? Because it's just sort of not my domain. And that kind of call it tribalism or whatever. It's just in my experience, a total fact of life. And if we can align on culture around our code, I think that's a superpower. And obviously, I'm constantly pushing for style stuff, and that all goes without saying. So no surprise that I would advocate this, but just want to fully mention there that like taking over maintainership of that would be an opportunity to really get to know it and possibly help to propagate it if indeed you think it's a good way of doing things. Okay. So this one, Keybase admin, Manfred asked the right question when I gave him an update about this. So if anybody doesn't know, we have a Bisq team on Keybase. I guess most people will know what Keybase is. But I set it up on a bit of a whim when Keybase announced that they were going to have sort of chat teams, basically in what is a would-be Slack competitor, right? Where there's still heavily centralized infrastructure, but it's end-to-end encrypted, and Keybase, their brand is around kind of a smart, user-friendly, solid crypto communications, encrypted Git repositories, and so on. And I figured as a kind of hedge or just looking ahead, if they really executed on that, and we set up a team there and just let it grow and not organically. But if they really executed on that and they built a viable Slack replacement, it might be somewhere in the sweet spot of moving to another centralized provider, but one with significantly better characteristics, right? So it doesn't matter. This Keybase thing is like not even worth the breath that I'm wasting right now because there's just a few people there. And it's not in any way useful communication infrastructure for us yet, if ever. And what I actually think about doing it, so it's an interesting use case, basically, because here's a role that is reasonable, right? Like this wasn't, I never proposed this role because it was kind of pre-proposals. But you can imagine that somebody could have proposed this role like, hey, let's set up a team on Keybase and see what happens, and I'll take care of it. I'll be the Keybase admin. Okay, great. So they create that role, they take responsibility for it, and then what we find 6 months later is that they do a monthly report every month that says nothing to report, right? Just no activity, nobody cares, right? So what should we do? Like this is just something that we haven't run into yet. Basically a role that's kind of run its course or isn't useful now or whatever. If you were the roles maintainer, right, you'd be wearing that hat and you'd be thinking like, okay, well, what should I try putting into the process to address this so that we don't just have some useless vestigial role cluttering things up, right? Just making noise. And I would say it's obvious enough. Close the role issue, call it, deferred or on hold or whatever. It could come back to life later, but like basically some indication that this role isn't even worth the monthly update that we do about it. So we're going to close it for now, right? And I think that's a very good example of what it means to like keep things clean and just be looking after the integrity of stuff. So Manfred asked exactly that question after I gave my 5th month of nothing to report. He's like, does this role matter? Should we keep this role? And I think the answer is no. I can keep the credentials and so on, but I'll just close that issue, right? So obviously, nobody needs to take that on unless somebody's really passionate about Keybase. Speak up. You can do whatever you want with it. I'd give you access there. But it's also just a good example of the, managing the evolution of roles over time. Support staff. So this is another, it's sort of squishy one, like ambassador. I've been trying to make less squishy, trying to define it. I think it's still a work in progress. And again, Alexi is the prime example here of somebody who's not just being an ambassador, right? Like, helping people, answer just a newbie question or telling somebody in a thread on Reddit that Bisq exists that maybe they didn't know, right? That's all kind of ambassador work, or certainly doing an interview or a podcast or, all of that kind of stuff is definitely ambassador work. But support is just what it sounds like, right? But it's non-traditional in our case. We don't really have this like super dedicated support channels. They've sort of emerged. I mean, the forum is generally a big support channel. The general channel in Slack often becomes that for a few moments. Support channel in Slack is, of course, for that purpose, and we often direct people there. There's the support repository in the Bisq Network org, where, if you go and look, you'll see that's another issues-only repository, and it's mostly just filled with fee reimbursement support tickets, right? When people have failed trades. So that's all kind of infrastructure that just, it's there, it's ready to be used. It does get used to some extent, but the idea is that hopefully there's enough structure there, and ultimately there needs to be enough kind of people standing by to, if we continue to grow and people have, it's just reasonable to expect that we'll have more and more support requests, not only just proportionally with the number of people using Bisq, just like linearly multiplying how many we have now with how many new users, how many support requests we have now with how many new users we have. That's the kind of linear progression that we should expect with support issues and cases and questions. But of course, we should also expect an additional kind of coefficient on top of that linear progression of, basically the wider the circle goes, the less savvy the users may be, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense for us to just sort of get ready, like just start being a little bit prepared for less savvy people showing up. Mostly, I think we're really blessed right now with just how we put out communications and who's been attracted to the project. Most everybody is I think a 8 out of 10 or better. Just kind of all the people in the world with technical savvy and internet know-how and certainly crypto know-how and so on. So we have our lives pretty easy in support land right now, and it's one of the reasons it's one of the many reasons that I've always been very hesitant to do any kind of traditional marketing. Is I don't want to mess with that. I'd much rather that we continue to grow, basically reaching out to as much of that technically savvy pie as possible first, because basically acquisition costs are very low. They can largely self-serve. And I think if we start, so again, I'm digressing here, hopefully it's of some use. It's all around support, but it touches on a few other things. This gets into the strategy of doing the docs now, is that I think that's, to keep growing, we do have to, I don't think we can just stand still and just expect that people will sort of, continue to grow around Bisq. I think we have, a lot of things that are just inherently inefficient. Like, we can service every user right now on Slack or wherever else. Wouldn't much more growth for us to be overwhelmed. And so I think having like really kick-ass docs, like docs, most of us are developers on this call. There are like the projects that you've loved and basically become a total evangelist for. And if you really look, it's so much because of their docs. Like, they really turned you into a hero quickly, right? And so I'm very passionate about this topic of having fantastic docs. And it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of docs. It just means like damn useful ones. So I think doing that work now, really beginning to lay that stuff out and lay out the kind of culture of being a kind of sort of documentation driven or oriented or centric or something like that is a good way to set ourselves up for that growth into ever larger circles of technically savvy people, of just switched on, bright people that can take care of themselves if you give them the resources. And so, the uber geeks that we've had in here for the last 2 years, they're doing the lifting, right? They're really figuring it out. Not that we've done such a terrible job on UX or whatever, but it's still a relatively big ask, what we ask for people from Bisq to engage and to onboard with it. And so if we can build this bridge now, that you don't have to be an uber geek. You have to have enough sort of critical sense to notice, oh, there are documents, they look good. They're on a silver platter. I'm going to read the Getting Started guide, right? And if you read the Getting Started guide, you're probably going to have a very pleasant, or as pleasant as possible, experience of getting up and running with Bisq, as you could imagine, in probably the shortest period of time. So I think that sort of stuff, missionary evangelism for projects. I think people really share about projects when they take that level of care. So about why I'm doing that, but it's also just generally on the strategy of, look, we don't want a lot of support. If we could wave a magic wand, we'd have, of course, 0 support issues. That's all cost. So the strategy from my perspective is how can we defer? Of course, we can't have no support issues, but how can we defer the worst kind of support issues, where we're basically getting people into Bisq that maybe just aren't even ready for it, or Bisq isn't ready for them, I think to do that is to just continue to put out signals that attract the people that we want. So for 2 years, we've put out signals basically to other cypherpunks, Bitcoiners, serious people in space, certainly technically savvy people. We've been signaling to all of them in everything we do, right? In how we communicate, and especially in how we don't. And that's, I think, really worked out. And now, if we're going to continue growing, we have to send the right signals to a larger group of people, right? And I think documents are one such signal that says, hey, welcome, right? This project is ready for you. And then the questions that they'll ask will probably be smart questions, right? Or will be more likely to be smart questions. Like every one of those docs that I'm writing, you don't see it there yet. I haven't pushed this yet, but every doc will have at the bottom. I think the Getting Started doc has this now. Improve this doc, and that's nothing innovative, but it sends a signal, and of course the first link is to edit it directly, submit a pull request if you can, and the second one is to create an issue. And the issue goes directly to that repository, puts the right subject line in the issue, improvement request for such and such .adoc, right? So like, if people are having trouble or have a question or whatever, like what can we do to make it the smartest, best, most efficient, most pleasant for them support experience possible, so that we don't just get into this world of like, just answering the same question over and over and over again, or really, I think the thing to avoid is the need to have like just quote unquote dedicated support staff, right? That do nothing but just answer questions. I mean, maybe it gets to that point at some point, but aspirationally, I would want to aim for a situation where when new questions that haven't been answered come in, they somehow get into a system where a link can be shared in the future, right? Knowledge-based style, and that's what Docs is a kind of mix of a user manual and a wiki and a knowledge base, and so on. It can be and grow into all of those things. But with all of that said, there does still need to be some bodies who make it their role to say, hey, if somebody shows up and they've got a question, I'll answer it, or I'll at least try to point them in the right direction. Again, Alexi's been doing that. I do that. Definitely other people are doing that. Just first person comes to mind is Homard. I think I've noticed him answering a lot of questions lately. I think we all do it, right? But it would be good if there were, I think, a couple more people that just made it there, at the level of, I'll do a monthly report. Like I do enough of this that I'll do a monthly report and say, hey, these were the kinds of support requests that I was getting. This is what seems like a really inefficient thing that we're repeating all the time now. Help escalate stuff so that we can eliminate the most inefficient time wasters. That's an hour now, and I told myself I was not going to go much more than an hour because even though I can't tell in the moment, I think it turns out to be not so great when I talk too much. So maybe I'll just speed up here because I have to thank you all, right? I'm basically, each one of these needs to digress on things that I think are actually more important, but they're all in the context of these roles. So I hope all that's been useful. YouTube admin is the super ideal thing that I'd love to see with YouTube admin is just somebody who like literally just make sure that everything works. We're going to do a live stream, growth call live streams. They set them up. I don't know if this is too much to ask, but like it's what I want is I really just want to be able to mention somebody or a group of somebodies and just say like, hey, we're going to do a call to talk about distributing roles on Thursday. Could you get that set up, right? And maybe this has a lot of crossover with the events manager or maintainer. Like maybe there's 2 roles that should be 1 here, but just somebody who can, when we upload a video, they upload it to YouTube, they put the right title on it, they put a few show notes in there. They just make sure that like all this effort that we put out to record stuff is actually available. And Derek was on board to do that, and then he disappeared. I'm not sure what's happened. We've mentioned it a couple of times, and crickets so far. Part of the nature of doing what we're doing, I think, is, yeah, well, people really don't have any obligation if they're bonded to do anything, right? And so maybe he'll be back, and maybe there's some extenuating circumstance and whatever. But that's a missing thing. Like I know Manfred has uploaded at least 3 videos in the last week. One with Bernard, I think one with Joachim. I'm not sure. Maybe some others. That I'm sure are just full of super valuable information, and they're just sitting in Slack waiting to go to DevNull. So somebody just to when you notice that stuff is showing up, get it up into YouTube, help people set up and manage the actual live events. It's stressful. Like Christoph's very good at it now. I know the right buttons to push. Manfred's pushed the buttons a few times, but it's stressful. Like setting up those events and clicking go live. And, I always screw something up. I always have YouTube open in another tab, and then the sound comes through and I have to go find the tab and close it. If you don't do it every day, like, the World Crypto Network guy does it every day, you're just not very good at it. We're a bunch of amateurs. And it would be super cool if somebody was like, I'm the YouTube/events manager. I take care of accounting. I take care of YouTube. I get videos uploaded. It's like, it actually ends up being a chunk of work, and it's damned valuable. So whether or not anybody on this call does it, and remember, if you take one of these on, the whole point is just to take the first step in distribution, right? And that you're then that much more ready to pass it on to somebody else. If this isn't your dream thing to be YouTube events admin or whatever, doing a tour of duty there is still extremely valuable. And that's basically some low-hanging fruit that when somebody shows up, into Slack and kind of go like, hey, this looks like a really interesting potential contributor. Handing that role to somebody who's relatively untested is a reasonable risk to take, right? Basically did it with Derek, didn't work out. It didn't work out so far. Nothing really lost, right? So even if you don't take on these roles, it's just I think we all want to have an eye out as people show up. People are like, what can I do? I'm so interested in this project. Like knowing about these kind of gaps and seeing the gaps. Like it would be so much better if we had like really great service basically around YouTube, like maximize these communication channels that we have. Then you can help suggest that, right? You can point people in the right direction and so on. Freenode is a super simple one. I still have the keys to that, to Bisq on Freenode. Mike takes care of it. Totally right now. It would be great if somebody else who is just a daily IRC user and knows something about sort of opt commands and stuff like that in IRC, like you've opt a channel before, maybe. You just take that from me because I'm not using IRC on a daily basis at all. I'm just useless there. So I don't get any fixed problems. So I can just hand those keys over to somebody else, and you can be Mike's backup. So if you're already in the Bisq IRC channel with any regularity, that would be a good sign that you're a good candidate for this role, because there would basically be no additional activity for you. You'd be the secondary role owner on that, and Mike would remain primary. Just so that multiple people have the keys. Go ahead.
Just short. So I put my name already there, or my nickname.
Cool.
I'm in the channel. I'm using IRC for what 20 years or so. So I know how it works, and so I can do that. That's not problem, and I will have an eye on it. And yeah.
Nice, perfect. Thank you. We already talked about this one, maintainer, president maintainer, and this one. So what we don't have here listed is the design maintainer, design repository maintainer. And I'm just putting that there because I see this is basically very closely related right now. Pedro's not on the call, right? No. But you know, I think everybody's familiar with Pedro and Diogo's work and so on. Design and development right now. Pedro put together.
Chris, sorry, the audio was again pretty bad the last 5 or 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Was it bad for anybody else? Can you speak up if it was bad? For
yeah, for me as well.
Okay.
Yeah, cut out.
Okay.
It's fine now.
So I'm just going to talk for a few seconds. Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Works. Yeah.
Was some strange kind of feedback or whatever.
Huh. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to say a few things about the website in the context of design, because they're really tied up together right now. So we've seen this proposal from Pedro. People may know, like, you know, I reached out just in like one-to-one with Pedro, even it might be a couple of months now or 6 weeks ago now, just to really let him know, like, you know, from Manfred's perspective, from my perspective, I think from everybody that I've talked to that's seen the work, you know, we really like what we see, and specifically, we'd really like you to execute it. And you know, this is one where I think it's just my own personal experience talking. Manfred has a lot of design experience. There's something special about, you know, executing a design vision, but that, you know, I think it really benefits from indeed just that, a strong vision. So, you know, having a design lead, you know, see through all the aspects of that. I have a strong intuition that's important. So I'd hate to see that work done piecemeal or without a plan. It may be done incrementally, but not without some kind of plan. Hopefully. And so Pedro was up for that, and he put together a Google Doc kind of proposal. I haven't spent enough time with it myself. It needs to get into a proper proposal and just into the proper process and so on. I'd like to encourage people on this call to maybe pick that up. You know, I'm not in terms of that work, and so for example, if you were considering the proposal's maintainer role, then it might also make a lot of sense for you to just work with Pedro. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like get his current doc into a GitHub issue, and, you know, like kind of make sure that this fairly involved process, you know, actually has a sane plan, right? Because we just don't get to manage things like a company. We just don't get to assign people to do stuff and then give them deadlines and all kinds of other conveniences. Those aren't available here, right? So what there ultimately needs to be is like a clear plan and strong ownership and trust. You know, like, okay, let's do it. And the aspirational, you know, timeline that Pedro and I were talking about, I think I wrote about this in Slack, forgive me if this is a repeat for everybody, but we talked about basically having the key elements of that design refresh up by HCPP 18, right, the conference in Prague, October 10th. And that would just be a wonderful moment to, you know, kind of unveil that stuff, both in the app with some iteration of applying that design to the app,
Good evening.
Yeah, just 1 second, guys.
Sorry
Hang
for
on.
the disturbance.
Hang on.
Yeah, maybe give a little bit of additional or just feedback to this design topic as well. I think, I mean, we discussed already with a few people, and I think the design role is something very special. It doesn't work really well. Chris is back.
Yes, and
you will be tired after this. You won't drink.
Really, just 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. My my hall pass is coming to an end here. But I think just to follow on with what you're saying, right? Is it is an important role. I think Pedro should really do it. It's his idea, but I've been very intentionally not doing anything with the website in the meantime, other than people just do basic updates to it and stuff, and it's pretty painful, right? Like the website today is no longer an accurate reflection of the soul and ethos and spirit and level of just the level that we're executing on, right? What Bisq has become is not really reflected in that website anymore. So it pains me to have it stick around that way. It's part of the reason that it's refreshing for me to share links with people on Twitter as often as I can, pointing them to the new doc site, right? Because there's something new there, and that does reflect something a bit better. So I think what really matters is, if you want to take on that maintainer role for the website, anybody who knows, Jekyll and their way around, HTML and CSS and Markdown, right? So if you've operated a static, statically generated blog before, you're probably overqualified. Same thing as a maintainer everywhere. You're just merging stuff, making sure that the process gets followed. But there's also, some kind of you may be the person who's helping to coordinate and, helping to plan the execution of that design refresh on the website. And that, there are constraints that come with a static website, and like being the technical person that can inform design of what those constraints are. And they're, in my experience, they're always a strength. They always make things simpler and better that we have a static website. So it's all good. But like design has to understand and internalize what they can and cannot do technically, and so on and so forth, right? What's idiomatic for a static website? So there's that. So basically, and this is, you basically become a designer, right? Like I'm not saying that the website maintainer is also a designer, but like somebody should play that role. And I naturally think of you, Christoph. I think obviously you're doing that for desktop. And I think you have a fine voice there in the website. I can also try to participate, but if somebody has inclinations there, if that's a passion for you, or you think you have something to say, you'd like to contribute, you'd like to have some authorship in that design, that's an opportunity, right? So it's a few things in one, but I'll leave it at that since I have to go quite quickly. SQ, I think, said he's going to take this one, so I won't say anything more about that. And assets maintainer, I think we're in a pretty good steady state with assets right now. I'm actually really proud of this, that we've done this. We have like the altcoins and non-Bitcoin assets and so on. They take up very little of our time collectively, right? I think this is true in terms of just support requests, arbitration requests, and now listing requests. This stuff is almost all on Rails. And that just makes me so happy that we don't waste any time on this stuff, right? So the assets repository maintainer is, again, same as always, just about making sure the reviews have happened and knowing what the standards are and making sure things are the standard and hitting merge when it's time to merge. I think the arrangement that we have right now is actually really good. Bernard's been doing reviews. He's been the principal reviewer, and I've been click and merge once or twice a week. There's no rush, right? Because that stuff only goes out when we ship a desktop release anyway. So I'm not sure we have to do anything differently here, but Bernard would be the natural candidate to actually take over the maintainership. The reason that I hesitate to do that, though, is that if Bernard takes on maintainership, he's now also reviewer and maintainer, just by default. And I think that's the thing that we want to avoid if we can. So we already have a separation there, and anywhere that we get the reviewer-maintainer separation, I think that's kind of precious. It's good to keep it if you can. So I don't mind keeping the maintainer bit because it's virtually no work for me, because I really trust Bernard now. I know he knows the standards. He totally enforces them. And when I look at these, when I review his review, it's very quick, and I just hit merge. So I think that can stay as it is. But DNS admin, super easy. Christoph will get access to our Cloudflare account, so he can operate that stuff. Maybe Christoph will even make you primary there, so you're kind of the first one to respond to these requests.
Fine.
And I'd be secondary. And then compensation maintainer, and that's just something we already talked about offline. I think everybody on this call has done compensation requests. Everybody knows what that's about, and so very much appreciated that you take that on, Christoph. It's one of the more time-consuming roles in terms of like there's 2 days a month where that just kind of dominates my world. Like if I look at the end of the month, it tends to be about a day doing my own reports, and probably not quite a day, but a good half day or 3/4 of a day, all told. Like just getting everybody's requests into the spreadsheet and just crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And I think the good thing there is that it's all it's not really documented per se. I have some documentation on it, but it's well repeated, and it's a chain. The compensation, the conduct compensation voting issues are all in a chain. Each one links to the last one, right? So you can really see we've been doing it just the exact same way for months and months, and there's a checklist, and you can just go through it. And obviously, I'll help you go through it this month to whatever degree you need.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll try to copy and paste as good as possible.
yeah, and of course improve and do it better and whatever. Sorry, I just had to swallow a pill. So so let me kill my screen share here, and yeah. Okay, well, it was a little bit of a fire hose from me. Thanks for taking it all in. And I think I actually just have to leave it at that, because I'm gonna get hooked back up here. Thanks everybody for whatever you take on, and really this thing that we've been I've tried to say it everywhere is work on what you want, and I really mean that. I mean, don't just do something because just totally taking one for the team or something like that. I mean, if you're called to do that, great, but don't feel over obligated. It'll all work out. Things won't come crashing down. But just thanks for considering. And mostly, I think of this as this kind of like dissemination of these roles. Mostly, I think about it as an opportunity to get that many more people like really primed into the process of what it looks like to disseminate a role, so that you can then bring on the next person, or the next person becomes a secondary, you transition an apprentice and whatever. We should all just be getting good at this kind of process of delegation over time. What else? That's about it. I'll just say I'm just completely happy to do what work I can, and you'll see me around, and most days are mostly good days, and some days are I lay in bed all day and don't want to do anything and don't want to move. So if you don't see me, everything's probably fine, but I'm just relaxing. Anything before I go?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris, and yeah, take your rest also. Don't overdo it. Feeling you are still working way too much.
Yeah, there is a nice thing here, which is that the nature of this situation is that I simply cannot work at certain times. So it doesn't have to be a struggle. It's just, there's no fucking way I'm going to touch my computer at certain points. So I get rest for sure at those times, right? Yeah, thanks everybody else.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Chris. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we can finish the call now. Everybody should feel free to add their names and think more about it and have a little bit more overview about the links, the role links, and read a little bit. Would be great if we can fill in most of those, and if not, yeah, then probably the people who have already too many roles will take over one of those as well. And I mean, to take over a role, especially for those people who have already quite a few roles, like Stefan also, or Christoph especially, it doesn't mean that you're sticking all the time with this role. I mean, the next opportunity, or when you see some good candidate, we can redistribute it again. And it's actually really a requirement for the DAO, is when this exit criteria for exiting the phase 0 is also that we have really distributed all those roles and there are not single point of failures on the human side. Okay, then yeah, in 20 minutes we are having our next call with the broad call. So let's make a break here that you have time for preparing. And thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye. See you.